Hey guys, it's Leah B from Prestige Veteran Medical Consulting. I am a U.S. Army veteran, physician assistant, and former compensation and pension examiner. So today I have Rebecca Deming from ProVet Legal on. We are going to talk about a big issue that has been in the news that a lot of veterans are talking about. And it's regarding the upcoming 2025 changes for sleep apnea and VA disability. So before we jump into that, I want to again introduce Rebecca and let her tell you guys about herself if you haven't seen her before. She is amazing. So go ahead, Rebecca, tell them about you and your firm.
Hi, Leah. Thanks so much for having me back on. Like Leah said, I'm Rebecca Deming. I've been practicing law since 2008. I started off in big law and then kind of moved over to policy and worked with State Department in Afghanistan doing rule of law and working side by side with our service members. And then from there, I kind of transitioned into more policy stuff and training on the civil military side and application of international humanitarian law in UN peacekeeping and NATO engagements and trainings. And then when my husband retired from the Navy, I learned about VA disability law and got really interested in it, and I've been doing it ever since. So my firm does exclusively VA disability law.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for being on the show, and you always add a ton of value. So let's just jump straight into these 2025 changes. So I think this is going to be a really big video because people are always interested in what's going on with sleep apnea. I don't know why it's such a. I think it's because so many veterans have sleep apnea. It's just crazy to see, right? So 2025 changes. Again, can you explain what the current VA disability ratings are for sleep apnea for those that don't know, so that they can kind of get up to speed with where things are right now?
Yep. So, like you said, sleep apnea is a huge one for a lot of our veterans. I think one of the big issues is because so many veterans have it, and the scientific community is still figuring out, you know better than I do, they're still figuring out what causes sleep apnea and why it's so prevalent amongst the veteran community. There's a few conditions that will trigger it. And then there's some that's just kind of like, I don't know, but it's definitely more prevalent in the military community. So anyway, we're not getting into how to connect sleep apnea. It's just that it is a big issue. But the other reason it's a big issue is because it can really be a big ticket item for people. And we did another video where we were talking about VA math and how VA combines ratings, and having some of those disabilities that are rated more highly is really critical to being able to get to the higher levels of compensation in VA. So a lot of tens, if you have a knee, 10% for knee, 10% for tinnitus, 10% for your blood pressure, it's gonna be a lot harder to get a higher rating than if you had come in with a single disability that's 30 or 50%. So sleep apnea can be rated anywhere between 0 and 100%, but most often we see it rated at 50%. The 0% rating is for a diagnosed condition with no real symptoms. So if you do a sleep study and they say, yeah, it's sleep apnea, but it's so mild that you barely present with symptoms, or sleep on your side and you'll be fine, or the doctor doesn't prescribe anything, and that's a 0%. If you have sleep apnea and you have persistent daytime hypersomnolence, but so you're sleepy all the time during the day, and that's 30%. If they prescribe you a CPAP machine or another breathing assistance device, and this is something that we argue sometimes, sometimes people get those mouth guards prescribed and my interpretation of it, the way that I've argued it and I've won, is that does count as a breathing assistance device. And now there's that Inspire, I think, is the implantable device. So if you have a device that you're using that's prescribed for sleep apnea, that's an automatic 50%. Mm-hmm. If the sleep apnea is service connected, of course. And then if you're on around the clock oxygen, if you have chronic respiratory failure, or if you need a tracheostomy, that's 100%. And that's rare. We do see it occasionally, especially if if you have comorbid conditions. So if you also have COPD and sleep apnea or something, because it is rated as a respiratory condition. So a lot of people don't realize that if you have asthma and sleep apnea, you're only going to get one, and they'll kind of rate them under the same code, whichever one it gets you the higher rating.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and we definitely, I think there might be some upcoming changes to that too that have been proposed, but we can get on that on another day of the separation of those conditions that were previously pyramided, asthma and OSA specifically. But why do you think the VA is changing the system for this condition specifically?
I think the argument for changing it, and so to be clear, they're changing, and we'll get into exactly how they're changing it, but they're making it less favorable to veterans. I think that a lot of people are prescribed a CPAP machine and they use it well and they're compliant with the CPAP machine, and it's really not impacting their lives in a significant way, or at least that VA sees it's not a significant way. I mean, I know you and I were talking offline about even just using the CPAP, how that can kind of impact a marriage because you're sleeping next to Darth Vader, or
Mm-hmm.
having to put that on at night before you go to bed can be challenging. And then you've got people with mental health disabilities that feel like they've got claustrophobia issues. So there's a lot of issues. But um, if you use a CPAP machine and that cures your disability, and so you're not sleepy when you wake up, and you're not um, having migraines because you're oxygen desaturation at night, or whatever, you're not having these side effects, then, I, as much as I want to advocate for the veterans, I do see the point that it may not have a 50% impact on people's lives. So they're trying to realign the rating code to correspond with the level of functional impairment that each condition is causing the veteran.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough because I can see arguments on both sides of the aisle for this because, having to be tethered to a machine for the rest of your life is really, that's a challenging thought, especially if you want to do stuff like go camping or, go anywhere. You've got to take this machine with you everywhere, right? And how do you, deal with that? And then there's a lot of people that say, how can sleep apnea be related to service? And that's a whole nother can of worms that we're probably not going to get into today. Like, how does your service cause this? But, we've got a ton of videos on secondary service connection and sleep apnea and things like that you can also check out. But so let's talk about some of those major changes. So under the new system, the CPAP alone is not going to get people to that 50% level automatically. What will determine a veteran's rating instead?
So if you're asymptomatic with or without treatment, that's probably going to be a 0%. If you have sleep apnea with incomplete relief, as noted or as determined by a sleep study, so not just your buddy statements or your statement from yourself or your wife saying that it's not fully working or you still have some symptoms, that's going to be rated probably at a 10 or a 30%.
Mm-hmm.
And then a 50% rating would be with ineffective treatment or unable to use the treatment. So, like I said, the people who might have claustrophobia issues because they're dealing with PTSD and CPAP, or they have other physical disabilities that prevent them. And I know they have different ways you can put the mask on, depending on if you're a side sleeper or a back sleeper or whatnot. I'm not sure. Do you know, Leah, are there CPAP machines that you can wear if you're a stomach sleeper?
So I actually really don't know about that. There's a lot of different types of masks that you can wear, right? So you can wear one that, a full face mask. You can wear the nasal pillow. Again, there's the mandibular devices that people can wear, or the Inspire. I don't know that there's one that's specifically better for side sleepers or people that sleep on their stomach or whatever. But there's a lot of different options that sleep specialists will, consider when they look at your clinical picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So then the 100% rating is pretty much going to stay the same. It's for sleep apnea with ineffective or unable to use treatment due to comorbid conditions and with end organ damage. So if it's so bad that it's resulting in major additional damage to your lungs or your heart or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
then you could get the 100% rating. But it's 100% is rare now, and it's going to continue to be rare down the line. The thing that we're going to see the change is that you're not automatically going to get a 50% just because the doctor writes that prescription for a CPAP machine.
Sure. That makes sense. So let's talk about the impact on veterans that are already rated for sleep apnea. So for veterans that already have let's say you've got a 50% rating or whatever under the current system, will their ratings be impacted by the upcoming changes?
No, they shouldn't. They should be grandfathered in under the existing regulation, as should anybody who initially files their claim for sleep apnea before the change in regulation. So if you're thinking about filing a claim for sleep apnea, we're expecting these regulations to come into effect in April. I think there may be some fluctuation, new administration and always unpredictability in terms of when VA implement stuff. But right now they're anticipated to come into April 2025. So if you're thinking about filing a claim for sleep apnea sometime in the next year or two, get it in now, even if you don't have the diagnosis yet, even if you don't have all your buddy letters or your service treatment records or whatever other pieces you are waiting for. Because if you file after the law changes, you're going to be stuck with the new regulation.
Sure. And I don't want to get too much into the appeals process, but for the most part, if someone again is continuously pursuing a claim, maybe they filed a year ago and you're in a higher level review or a supplemental claim or whatever, or you're waiting on the a court date, you should be still, even if it's not decided for 6 months after that April date, it should be tied back to the previous rating criteria.
Correct. The one caveat would be, like, let's say that you filed in 2010 and it was denied and you never reopened it, and that denial is final and it's not continuously pursued. And I know you mentioned continuous pursuit. I just wanted to kind of clarify that for some of the listeners. And then you reopen the claim after the change in law, you're not going to be grandfathered in. So it has to be a claim that's in continuous pursuit that was filed prior to the change in law.
What about if somebody requests an increase after the change? Could they potentially be decreased?
They shouldn't be decreased. If you, I wouldn't poke the bear. If you have a rating, you put in for an increase, your rating should still be protected. It should still be grandfathered in under the prior rating criteria. But anytime you put in for an increase, you're putting your rating in with the lowest level VA employee claims adjudicators. There's a lot of staff turnover. There's a lot of junior employees, and then as they get more experience, they get promoted into more senior positions, but they're not the ones adjudicating the initial claims. So there's just a lot of mistakes that happen, and it is very possible, very likely, that they will try to decrease it, and then you're in a position of having to hire a lawyer, hire an accredited claims agent to fight to get back something that you'd already won. So I wouldn't say never file for an increase. There may be circumstances where an increase is warranted, but I would say if you're thinking about that, even though it should be protected, don't assume that it will be, and talk to somebody who can adequately represent you on that issue and give you good advice for your specific fact pattern.
Sure. So, regarding some of these legal and strategic considerations, are there any challenges or appeals that might come up because of these changes?
There's always lobbying groups talking to VA. I'm a member of National Organization of Veterans Advocates, and they have a legislative and a regulatory advisory group that's kind of having open conversations with VA. There are chances that stuff could be challenged. I think this went through the comment period, so people had an opportunity to comment on these changes, and VA went ahead and approved the changes. So unless something unforeseen happens, I anticipate that these regulations are going to come into effect, and we should act as if they're going to come into effect. And if we get surprised and they don't get enacted or something else changes, then we can pivot at that point. But it's better to be safe and be prepared than not.
So I know you kind of already touched on this, but I really want to drive home your perspective on this, about the dates, right? So would you recommend that veterans who qualify who may qualify for sleep apnea under the current system file before April 2025, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, if you are at all thinking about it, even if you're even if you suspect that you have sleep apnea, but you haven't had a chance to go get diagnosed, and I know that it can be hard to get into the sleep specialist. It can be hard to get scheduled for a sleep study, a home sleep study. If you at all suspect that you have a claim, I would file it now. Don't just put in the intent to file, but actually file that claim before April of 2025. And if you later find out that you go to the sleep doctor and you don't have sleep apnea, you can withdraw the claim or kind of just write a letter to VA and let them know that you thought you had
Sure.
sleep apnea and you don't. You may have something different. You may have insomnia. You may have sleep disordered breathing. You may have some. If you think you have sleep apnea, I mean, if you think you have sleep apnea, I guess you would probably advise Leah as a physician assistant, you should go get checked out anyway because it can have major impacts on your health. So,
Absolutely.
claim aside, uh, go get checked out, but file the claim even if you're kind of still doing your own due diligence on whether you might qualify.
Yeah, from a medical perspective, we usually use something called the stop bang criteria. You guys can Google that. I think I've went over it in some of my videos, but it's such a low threshold, especially for men. If you have 2 or more of these criteria, your healthcare provider, if they, go by this criteria that the American Academy of Sleep Medicine uses, it's recommended to order a polysomnogram or sleep study. So 2 of the criteria off the bat are you a man? That's one criteria. Are you a man? And do you snore? Right. So if you're a man that snores, you're probably going to be meeting that criteria. Some of the other criteria are like, do you have hypertension? What is your neck circumference? Some of these things, but it's a very low threshold because the condition is so prevalent. And VA, is my understanding, a lot of times, not always, they'll just order you a sleep study if you filed the claim. Again, not always, but sometimes they will order a sleep study in conjunction with your claim for sleep apnea.
Now, I will say on that, you're right. Not always, because sometimes they'll say, "Oh, you don't have a diagnosed condition. There, we don't have a duty to assist." But if there's enough that kind of triggers, I have seen them order sleep studies as part of their compensation and pension review process.
Mm-hmm.
But that when you get a sleep study that's only part of a CMP exam, that doctor is not treating you. That doctor is only evaluating you. And so we had a client this past year who and I think people, especially if you're getting treatment through VA, it's confusing which exams through VA are for treatment and which ones are for evaluating you for your disability. But we had a client who got diagnosed with sleep
Mm-hmm.
apnea during the CMP exam, and VA rated him below the 50% because they didn't prescribe a CPAP. But he needed a CPAP. It was just that the evaluating doctor was not the treating doctor, and so the evaluating doctor couldn't prescribe any kind of devices or treatment for the condition. So, it's important to know if you're going to an exam, is it a treating doctor or is it an evaluating doctor? And that's going to really impact your rating, but it's also going to impact your health because here we have a veteran who got diagnosed with something that VA is like now acknowledge that he has this condition that could have major life-threatening side effects, and he's not getting any follow-up treatment for it. So
Right.
they should have, they do have some mechanisms that should catch those kind of things from happening, but it's better to be your own advocate and kind of keep an eye out for those kind of things.
Sure, sure. And really, from my interpretation, I don't know if this is your interpretation, but it's really just requires the use of. It's not necessarily that they have a prescription. However, those, to your point, those doctors that order the polysomnogram or that do the polysomnogram, all they're doing is giving that data on your sleep study. They're not giving even though they're not prescribing it, they're still not even making a recommendation like would benefit from CPAP or needs to get a CPAP from treating provider. They're giving the raw data points, right? Do you have sleep apnea or not? So again, I've seen people who require the use of a CPAP and their treating doctor says, hey, they need a CPAP because they have severe sleep apnea. Maybe the person has not gotten around to getting the CPAP yet, but they still require the use of. But again, it's important to differentiate that if you get one done during the CMP exam, most of the time they're not going to give any kind of recommendation one way or another. They're just, because they don't establish a patient relationship with you at all. They're just giving the data on your sleep study. But It is important not just for VA disability benefits purposes, but for your healthcare, because sleep apnea is like a silent killer, right? So like, we say that about hypertension too, but sleep apnea can cause a lot of problems like low testosterone, headaches, just a million different things, sleep apnea, cardiac changes, all kinds of stuff long term. So it's important to get that taken care of. So just a couple last questions. How can veterans get legal help if they're running into issues with the claims process for sleep apnea?
Um, I I always recommend that veterans work with an accredited VSO or accredited representative or an attorney. If they're filing an initial claim, usually most attorneys won't work with veterans on a new claim because VA regulates how much we can charge and when we can charge. And the I guess the basic advice is don't feed the sharks. I think VA is sending out those letters. If someone's trying to charge you up front for a new claim, you don't want to, you should not be paying for assistance with a new claim. There are plenty of veteran service organizations. You can go to your VA. There's actually veteran service organizations that have offices in the regional offices. There's plenty online, the DAV, VFW, American Legion, just to name a few. There's plenty of people that can help. But if you get denied, you should look to working with an attorney or an accredited claims representative.
So we're sort of getting to the end of the video. I don't know if you're seeing this on your end, Rebecca, but I think our feed froze up a little bit. So if you viewers out there see our feed just froze up, or maybe it's just me on my end, I apologize. But we always enjoy having Rebecca here. If you need to reach out to her, or any VA accredited attorney, you can go to va.gov and you can pull people's information. But I'm going to put a link to Rebecca's website, ProVet Legal, in the description of this video. She's a great resource. As always, thank you guys for watching and tuning in. If you have any questions or feedback on these changes, please drop them in the comments. And Rebecca, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Leah.
All right,
appreciate you having me as always.
Sure, for sure. All right, talk to you guys soon. Thank you.